The screams started when Gregory Brennan's horse threw him into the mud outside the Newton saloon, and they didn't stop even when the animal kept bucking, sending his bedroll and everything he owned scattering across the Kansas street like tumbleweeds in a dust storm. It was June of 1878, and Gregory had been riding hard for 3 days straight, trying to make it to Newton before the cattle auction ended. He was 24 years old, rail thin from months of eating nothing but hardtack and beans, and he had exactly $47 to his name. Those $47 were supposed to buy him a breeding bull that would finally give his struggling ranch a fighting chance. Instead, he was flat on his back in horse manure while half the town gathered to watch his humiliation. The laughter came in waves. First the men outside the saloon, slapping their thighs and pointing. Then the women in their Sunday dresses, covering their mouths but unable to hide the mirth dancing in their eyes. Even the children joined in, their high-pitched giggles cutting through the afternoon air like knives. "Look at that fool," someone called out. "Cannot even stay on his own horse." "That is the Brennan boy," another voice chimed in. "Heard his daddy died and left him that worthless patch of land outside town. Guess the apple does not fall far from the tree." Gregory scrambled to his feet, his face burning hotter than the Kansas sun beating down on his shoulders. His horse, a temperamental mare named Delilah, had finally stopped her tantrum and stood 20 feet away, watching him with what he could swear was amusement in her dark eyes. He wiped the mud from his face with the back of his hand, making it worse, and tried to gather what remained of his dignity. That was when he saw her. She stood in the doorway of the general store, a basket of supplies balanced on her hip. Unlike everyone else in that street, her face held no trace of mockery. She was watching him with something that looked almost like concern, her brow furrowed slightly as she took in the scene. She was maybe 22 or 23, with dark blonde hair pulled back in a practical bun, and wearing a simple blue calico dress that had been mended more than once at the hem. Their eyes met for just a moment before Gregory looked away, shame flooding through him. He stumbled forward to catch Delilah's reins, nearly tripping over his own scattered belongings in the process. More laughter erupted around him. "Need help there, Brennan?" This came from Tom Richardson, the town's banker's son, who stood with 3 other young men outside the saloon. They were all dressed in fine clothes, their boots polished to a shine. "Maybe you should try walking. Might be safer for everyone involved." Gregory did not respond. He had learned years ago that talking back only made things worse. Instead, he gathered his things as quickly as he could, stuffing them into his bedroll with shaking hands. His hat had rolled into a puddle, and when he retrieved it, water dripped down his neck and back. Someone made a comment about drowned rats that set off another round of laughter. He managed to get back on Delilah, though she danced sideways and made it harder than it needed to be. As he finally got settled in the saddle, he risked one more glance toward the general store. The woman was still there, still watching him with that same serious expression. She gave him the smallest of nods, so slight he almost missed it. Then she turned and went back inside, and Gregory rode out of town with the sound of laughter still ringing in his ears. The Brennan Ranch sat 7 miles outside Newton, a collection of weathered buildings that seemed to sag under the weight of too many hard seasons. The house was barely large enough for one person, with a main room that served as kitchen, dining room, and sitting room all at once, and a single bedroom that still smelled faintly of the medicines his father had taken in those final months. The barn was in better shape than the house, which said something about his father's priorities. Gregory had inherited the place 6 months ago when consumption finally claimed Hiram Brennan's life. His father had been a hard man, quick with criticism and slow with praise, but he had loved the land in his own way. Unfortunately, love did not pay bills or fix fences or buy the cattle they needed to make the ranch profitable. That evening, Gregory sat at his father's old desk, counting his money for the third time and getting the same disappointing result: $47. The bull he had his eye on would cost at least $60, and that was if he could talk the seller down from the asking price of $75. He had missed today's auction thanks to Delilah's performance in town, which meant he would have to try again at the smaller sale on Friday. He leaned back in the chair, which creaked ominously under his weight despite the fact that he was probably 20 pounds lighter than he should be. Through the window, he could see the sun setting over his land, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. It was beautiful in a stark way, all rolling prairie grass and endless horizon. His father had always said this land would be worth something someday. Gregory was starting to think that someday might never come. The image of the woman from town kept drifting through his mind. He did not know her name or anything about her, but he could not forget the way she had looked at him. No pity, no mockery, just a calm assessment that had somehow been more comforting than any words could have been. He shook his head, trying to clear it. He had no time for such thoughts. There was work to be done, always work to be done. The fence in the south pasture needed mending, the roof of the barn was developing a leak, and he still had not finished clearing the brush from the creek bed. If he wanted this ranch to survive, he needed to focus on practical matters, not on mysterious women who did not laugh at his misfortune. But as he got ready for bed that night, checking the locks on the doors and windows out of habit more than necessity, he found himself wondering if he would see her again. Newton was not a large town. Their paths would likely cross eventually. And when they did, maybe he would have the courage to thank her for her silence. The rest of the week passed in a blur of back-breaking labor. Gregory worked from dawn until well after dark, trying to get the ranch in some kind of order. He fixed the south fence, patched the barn roof as best he could with the materials he had on hand, and spent 2 full days clearing the creek bed of the debris that had accumulated over the winter. Every night he fell into bed exhausted, his hands blistered and his back aching, but sleep did not come easily. He kept thinking about the auction, about the bull he needed, about the future that seemed to slip further away with each passing day. Friday morning dawned clear and hot. Gregory dressed in his least worn shirt, a blue cotton one that his mother had made years ago, before the fever took her when he was just 15. He scrubbed his face and hands until they were raw, trying to remove the dirt that seemed permanently ground into his skin. Then he saddled Delilah, who thankfully seemed to be in a cooperative mood, and headed back into Newton. The auction was being held in the stockyard on the east side of town, a sprawling complex of pens and chutes where the smell of cattle and horse manure hung thick in the air. Gregory arrived early, wanting to get a good look at the animals before the bidding started. The bull he wanted was a fine specimen, a 2-year-old Hereford with good bone structure and a calm temperament. The seller was a rancher from up north who was culling his herd before winter. Gregory watched the bull for a long time, noting the way it moved, the shine of its coat, the clear eyes that suggested good health. This was exactly what he needed. With a bull like this, he could finally start building his own herd properly. The few cows he had would produce strong calves that he could sell for good money. In a few years, if everything went right, he might actually be able to make a real living from the ranch. Nice animal, is it not? The voice came from behind him, and when Gregory turned, he found himself looking at the woman from the general store. Up close, she was even prettier than he had realized, with green eyes that held intelligence and a sprinkling of freckles across her nose that the sun had coaxed out. She was still carrying a basket, this one covered with a checkered cloth. "Yes, madam," Gregory managed to say, his tongue feeling thick in his mouth. "Real nice. Are you planning to bid on him?" She tilted her head slightly, studying Gregory with the same serious expression she had worn before. "Hoping to," he admitted, "if I can get the price right." She nodded slowly. "I heard you had some trouble with your horse the other day. Is she all right?" Gregory felt his face flush. Of course she had heard about it. The whole town had probably heard about it by now. "Delilah's fine. She just gets a little spirited sometimes." "Delilah," the woman repeated, and something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "That is a good name for a spirited horse." "My mother named her," Gregory said, then immediately felt foolish. Why would this woman care who had named his horse? But she just nodded again. "Your mother had good taste in names. I am Grace, by the way. Grace Parker. Grace." It suited her, Gregory thought. There was something graceful about the way she moved, the way she held herself with quiet confidence. "Gregory Brennan," he said, then added unnecessarily, "but I guess you already knew that." "Only because people in this town love to talk," Grace said, and there was a note of disapproval in her voice that made Gregory like her even more. "They do not always know what they are talking about, though." Before Gregory could respond, the auctioneer called for everyone to gather. Grace gave him another small nod and moved to stand near the fence, out of the way of the bidders. Gregory took his place among the handful of men who had gathered for the sale, his heart pounding in his chest. The bidding started at $50. Gregory waited, watching as two other men drove the price up to $55, then $60. When it hit $65, one of them dropped out. At $70, Gregory raised his hand. Even though he knew he did not have that much money, the auctioneer pointed at him. "70 from the young man in the blue shirt." "75, the other bidder countered immediately. It was Earl Thompson, a prosperous rancher who owned land on the other side of Newton. He could probably afford to go much higher. Gregory's stomach sank. He could not match that bid. He did not have $75, and even if he did, he needed to save some money for other expenses. Feed, supplies, the 100 other things that came up when running a ranch. He was about to drop out when he heard Grace's voice, clear and firm. $80. Every head in the stockyard turned to look at her. Women did not typically bid at cattle auctions, and the surprise on everyone's faces was evident. The auctioneer seemed momentarily confused. "Madam, did you just bid $80? "I did," Grace said calmly, "on behalf of Mr. Brennan here." Gregory stared at her, unable to process what was happening. Earl Thompson looked between them, his face reddening. "Now hold on just a minute. $80 is the bid," the auctioneer interrupted, clearly not wanting to lose a sale over some breach of protocol. "Do I hear 85? Earl Thompson muttered something under his breath, but shook his head. He was not about to let a woman push him into paying more than the bull was worth, not in front of half the town. "Sold to Miss Parker, bidding for Mr. Brennan for $80. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo across the stockyard. Gregory stood frozen, his mind racing. He had just bought a bull for $80 that he did not have. Or rather, Grace Parker had bought it for him. Why would she do that? What did she expect in return? Grace walked over to him, still carrying her basket. "You should probably go settle up with the auctioneer," she said quietly, "before he changes his mind." "Miss Parker, I do not have $80, Gregory said, keeping his voice low so the others would not hear. "I appreciate what you did, but I cannot accept. Do you want that bull or not?" Grace interrupted, her green eyes fixed on his. "Of course I want him, but then go settle up. We can discuss the details later." She reached into her basket and pulled out a small leather purse. "Here. Tell him you will bring the rest by the end of the week." Gregory took the purse automatically, feeling the weight of coins inside. He opened it to find exactly $80 in mixed bills and silver. It was more money than he had held in his hands in months. "I cannot take this," he said, trying to hand it back. "I do not even know how I would pay you back." "Mr. Brennan," Grace said, and there was a note of impatience in her voice now. "That bull is going to stand there looking confused while we argue, or you can go pay for him and we can figure out the rest. Which would you prefer?" When she put it that way, Gregory did not have much choice. He went to settle up with the auctioneer, who counted the money carefully and gave him a receipt. Then he went to collect his bull, who proved to be as docile as he had hoped. By the time he got the animal secured and ready to lead back to his ranch, most of the crowd had dispersed. Grace was waiting for him by the gate, her basket now resting on the ground beside her. The afternoon sun slanted across her face, highlighting those freckles and making her hair shine like wheat in harvest time. "Thank you," Gregory said, the words feeling inadequate for what she had done. "But I need to understand why you did that, and how I am going to repay you." "Walk with me," Grace said, picking up her basket. "I live just on the other side of town. We can talk on the way." Gregory led his new bull, which he was already thinking of as Ferdinand, and they fell into step together. For a while, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were their footsteps, the jingle of Ferdinand's lead, and the distant noises of Newton going about its Friday afternoon business. Finally, Grace broke the silence. "I lost my parents 2 years ago," she said, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Cholera during that outbreak that swept through Kansas. They left me their house and a small amount of savings. I have been working at the general store ever since, making enough to get by, but not much more." Gregory listened, not sure where she was going with this. "The thing is," Grace continued, "I know what it is like to have people look at you with pity or mockery or both. When my parents died, half the town treated me like I was made of glass, about to shatter at any moment. The other half treated me like I was a burden, a young woman alone with no family to look after her. Some of them expected me to fail, to have to sell the house and move away or marry the first man who would have me just to survive." She turned to look at him then, and Gregory saw a fierce determination in her eyes that matched something inside himself. "I am still here," she said. "I kept the house. I kept working, and I kept my head up even when it felt like the whole world wanted to see me fall. So when I saw you the other day, covered in mud with everyone laughing at you, I saw myself 2 years ago. And I decided right then that if there was any way I could help you, I would." Gregory felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the tightness that had been there for so long he had almost forgotten what it felt like to breathe freely. "That still does not explain why you would give me $80, he said softly. "I am not giving it to you," Grace corrected. "Consider it a loan. You can pay me back when your ranch starts turning a profit. No interest, no rush. Just an agreement between two people who understand what it is like to fight for something everyone else thinks is already lost." They had reached the edge of town, where the houses began to spread out and the prairie opened up before them. Grace stopped in front of a small but well-maintained house with a neat garden out front. Tomatoes climbed stakes in orderly rows, and Gregory could see beans and squash growing in carefully tended beds. "This is me," Grace said. "Your ranch is to the west, correct?" 7 miles out, Gregory confirmed. "Miss Parker, I do not know what to say. This is the kindest thing anyone has done for me since my father died." "You can start by calling me Grace," she said. "And you do not need to say anything, just make that ranch work. Prove all those people in town wrong. That will be thanks enough." Gregory nodded, his throat tight. Grace, would you, that is, could I? He took a breath and started again. Would you allow me to call on you sometime? To update you on how Ferdinand is working out, of course. Since you have a financial interest in the ranch now. Grace's lips curved into the first real smile he had seen from her. Of course you can call on me, Gregory. I would like that very much. The next few weeks passed in a haze of hard work and cautious optimism. Ferdinand settled into the ranch like he had always been there, and Gregory's 3 cows took to him immediately. Everything suggested that by next spring, he would have 3 strong calves to sell or add to his breeding stock. But it was not the bull that occupied most of Gregory's thoughts. It was Grace. He called on her the following Sunday, riding into town with his hair slicked down with water and wearing his best pants. She invited him in for coffee, and they sat at her small kitchen table talking for 2 hours about everything and nothing. He learned that she loved to read but could rarely afford new books, that she had taught herself to garden by trial and error, and that she had always dreamed of traveling beyond Kansas, but probably never would. There is so much world out there, she said wistfully, staring out her kitchen window at the endless prairie. Sometimes I feel like I am living in a very small corner of it. I have never been further than Topeka, Gregory admitted. Went there with my father once to buy supplies. Seemed like the biggest place in the world at the time, all those buildings and people. But I was glad to get back home. Do you ever want to leave? Grace asked. Go somewhere new, start fresh where nobody knows your name or your history. Gregory considered this. I used to when my father was still alive. He was not an easy man to live with. But now I do not know. This land is all I have left of my family. Feels like giving up if I walk away from it. Grace nodded slowly. I understand that. This house is the same for me. My mother's curtains are still on the windows. My father's tools are still in the shed. Sometimes I forget they are gone, and I expect to see them sitting here when I come home from work. They fell into a comfortable silence, the kind that only happens between people who understand each other without needing to fill every moment with words. From that day on, Gregory called on Grace every Sunday. Sometimes they walked through town together, and he noticed how people stared at them with varying degrees of curiosity and disapproval. Tom Richardson and his friends made comments under their breath that Gregory pretended not to hear. Some of the women in town whispered behind their hands when Grace passed by, but none of it seemed to bother Grace. She walked with her head high, her hand resting lightly on Gregory's arm, and if she heard the gossip, she gave no sign of it. They think I am wasting my time with you, she said matter-of-factly one Sunday as they walked past the church. Some of them have told me as much. They say you are just like your father, that the ranch will fail and I will be left with nothing. Gregory felt anger flare in his chest. If you want to stop seeing me, I would understand. I do not want to damage your reputation. Grace stopped walking and turned to face him. Gregory Brennan, I stopped caring about my reputation the day my parents died, and the so-called respectable people of this town showed me what their sympathy was really worth. If I want to spend my time with you, that is my choice, and nobody else gets a say in it. The force of her conviction left Gregory momentarily speechless. Then he did something he had been wanting to do for weeks, but had not quite found the courage. He took her hand in his, right there in the middle of the street where anyone could see. I am going to make that ranch work, he said quietly. I am going to prove every single one of them wrong, and when I do, I am going to ask you a very important question. Grace's eyes widened slightly, but she did not pull her hand away. What question would that be? I think you know, Gregory said, but I want to wait until I have something real to offer you, not just a dream and a pile of debt. Gregory, Grace said softly, squeezing his hand. I did not loan you that money because I thought you would fail. I did it because I could see that you had the same fire in you that I have. The refusal to give up even when everything seems impossible. That is worth more to me than any amount of money or success. You barely knew me when you made that loan, Gregory pointed out. I knew enough, Grace said. I knew you were the kind of man who would get back on a difficult horse, even after being humiliated in front of the whole town. I knew you were working that ranch alone, without asking anyone for help, because you are too proud to show weakness. And I knew that of all the people standing on that street laughing at you, I was the only one who saw what you really were. What am I? Gregory asked, half afraid of the answer. Stubborn, Grace said with a small smile. Determined, stronger than you look. Exactly the kind of man I want to stand beside, not behind. That night, riding back to his ranch under a sky full of stars, Gregory felt something he had not felt in years. Hope. Real, genuine hope that his life might actually become something more than a series of struggles and disappointments. The summer heat broke in late August, giving way to cooler nights and the first hints of autumn. Gregory's ranch began to show real signs of progress. The fences were all mended, the buildings were in good repair, and Ferdinand was proving to be everything Gregory had hoped for and more. The bull was gentle enough to handle easily, but possessed the strength and vigor that promised strong offspring. Gregory had also started working odd jobs in town to earn extra money. He helped repair the roof on the livery stable, worked a few days at the lumber yard, and even did some bookkeeping for the general store where Grace worked. The store's owner, a kind older woman named Mrs. Henderson, seemed to approve of Grace's choice in suitors, which made things easier. That boy works harder than any two men I know, Mrs. Henderson said one day within Grace's hearing. And he is honest as the day is long. You could do a lot worse, Grace. I know, Grace replied simply. By September, Gregory had saved enough money to buy 2 more cows at auction, both in calf. He bought them without needing to borrow from Grace, though she came to the auction to watch and gave him an encouraging nod when he made the winning bid. Afterward, they walked together through the town square, where a harvest festival was beginning to take shape. Local farmers and ranchers were setting up booths to display their best produce and livestock. There would be dancing later, once the sun went down and the lanterns were lit. "Will you dance with me tonight?" Gregory asked, surprising himself with his boldness. Grace looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the late afternoon light. "I would love to." That evening, as promised, Gregory returned to town wearing the suit his father had been buried in. It was a little loose on him, but Grace had helped him take it in earlier in the week, sitting at her kitchen table with needle and thread, making small adjustments while they talked about everything and nothing. The town square had been transformed. Lanterns hung from every available post and tree branch, casting warm pools of light across the packed dirt. A small group of musicians had set up on a wooden platform, and the sound of fiddle music drifted through the cooling air. Gregory found Grace standing near the punch table, wearing a dress he had never seen before. It was green, the color of new spring grass, and it made her eyes shine even brighter. She had done something different with her hair, too, leaving some of it loose around her face instead of pulling it all back in her usual practical style. "You look beautiful," Gregory said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "You look rather handsome yourself," Grace replied, a hint of color rising in her cheeks. They danced 3 dances in a row, and Gregory did not care that he was not very good at it or that people were watching them with interest. All that mattered was Grace's hand in his, and the way she smiled up at him like he was the only person in the world. On the 4th dance, Tom Richardson cut in, his expensive cologne announcing his presence before his voice did. Mind if I steal the lady for one dance, Brennan? He said, though it was not really a question. Gregory looked at Grace, who gave the slightest shake of her head. Actually, I do mind, Gregory said evenly. The lady and I are enjoying ourselves. Tom's eyes narrowed. Come now, do not be selfish. One dance is not going to hurt anything. Mr. Richardson, Grace said, her voice cold and formal, I do not wish to dance with you. Gregory and I are together, and I would appreciate it if you would respect that. Tom's face flushed red. Together? You cannot be serious. Grace, you are throwing yourself away on a man who cannot even keep his seat on a horse. My father could set you up properly. I could set you up properly if you would just stop wasting your time with this. That is enough, Gregory said, stepping between them. His heart was pounding, but his voice remained calm. The lady asked you to leave. I suggest you do so. For a moment, it looked like Tom might push the issue. His friends had gathered behind him, forming a small wall of expensive suits and mocking grins. But Mrs. Henderson appeared out of the crowd, her eyes flashing with disapproval. Thomas Richardson, your mother would be ashamed of you, making a scene at a community gathering. Go cool off somewhere before you embarrass yourself further. Tom looked like he wanted to argue, but Mrs. Henderson's authority in Newton was not to be trifled with. He shot Gregory one last venomous look and stalked off, his friends trailing behind him. Thank you, Grace said to Mrs. Henderson. No thanks needed, dear. Some young men need to be reminded of their manners. She patted Grace's hand and melted back into the crowd. Gregory and Grace did not dance anymore that night. Instead, they walked to the edge of the square where it was quieter, where they could hear the music but did not have to be part of the crowd. I am sorry about that, Gregory said. Tom has never liked me, but I did not think he would bother you. He has been bothering me for months, Grace admitted. Ever since his father suggested it would be a good match. Tom thinks he can wear me down eventually, make me see reason. He does not understand that some of us are not looking for the easy path. Is that what I am? Gregory asked with a slight smile. The hard path. You are the right path, Grace said simply. The only path I want. Gregory took both her hands in his. Grace Parker, I know I said I wanted to wait until I had more to offer you, but I cannot wait any longer. I do not have much. A ranch that is barely surviving, a house that needs work, and a future that is anything but certain, but I have this. He pressed one of her hands to his chest over his heart. And it is yours if you want it, all of it for as long as I live. Grace's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Gregory Brennan, are you asking me to marry you? I am, he said. I know it is not the proposal you probably dreamed of, no ring or fancy words. But it is real and it is honest, and I swear to you, I will spend every day trying to build a life that is worthy of you. Yes, Grace said, and a single tear escaped to trail down her cheek. Yes, I will marry you. And you do not need to build anything to be worthy of me. You already are. They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church, with Mrs. Henderson and the preacher's wife as witnesses. Grace wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her smaller frame, and Gregory wore his father's suit. They had no money for a honeymoon or a big celebration, but none of that mattered. What mattered was the way Grace looked at him when he slipped his mother's simple gold band onto her finger, the only piece of jewelry his family had owned. What mattered was the way her hand felt in his when they walked out of the church together as husband and wife. They moved Grace's belongings to the ranch that same day. It was not much, mostly clothes and books and a few precious items that had belonged to her parents. But when she arranged her mother's curtains in the windows of his house, their house now, it suddenly felt like a home instead of just a place to sleep between days of work. That first night as a married couple, they sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over their land. Grace leaned against Gregory's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her waist, still marveling at the fact that she was really his wife. "What are you thinking?" Grace asked softly. "I am thinking about that day in town," Gregory admitted, "when Delilah threw me and everyone laughed. I thought it was the worst moment of my life, but it led me to you, so maybe it was actually the best." "I did not laugh," Grace said. "That means everything, does it not?" "It means everything," Gregory agreed. "You were the only woman who did not laugh at me. And that told me more about who you are than 100 conversations could have." "I saw you," Grace said. "Really saw you, not just the mud or the embarrassment. I saw someone who was fighting, who refused to give up even when it would have been easier to just stay down. That is what I fell in love with, Gregory. Your strength, even when you did not know you had it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and Ferdinand answered with a low, rumbling sound from the barn. "We are going to make this work," Gregory said, and it was not a question. "Yes," Grace said, "we are." The first winter of their marriage was hard. Not because of any lack of love or commitment, but because running a ranch in Kansas during the cold months was brutal work. The temperature dropped well below freezing, and snow drifts piled up against the barn until Gregory had to shovel a path every morning just to reach the animals. But they faced it together. Grace proved to be as capable a rancher as any man, working beside Gregory to feed the cattle, break ice on the water troughs, and keep the buildings in repair. She had grown up in town, not on a farm, but she learned quickly and never complained, even when her hands were chapped raw from the cold and the work. They celebrated their first Christmas together with a simple meal of rabbit stew and cornbread. Grace had made a shirt for Gregory, sewing it by lamplight over many evenings. Gregory had carved her a small jewelry box from a piece of oak, spending hours on the intricate flower pattern on the lid. "It is beautiful," Grace said, running her fingers over the carved wood. "I will treasure it always." "It is not much," Gregory said, feeling self-conscious about his humble gift. "It is perfect," Grace insisted, "because you made it with your own hands for me. That makes it worth more than anything money could buy." January brought bitter cold and a blizzard that lasted 3 days. Gregory and Grace spent most of that time huddled by the fire, wrapped in every blanket they owned. Gregory told her stories about his childhood, about his mother who had died too young and his father who had never quite recovered from that loss. Grace shared memories of her parents, keeping their spirits alive through words and laughter. When the storm finally broke and they could venture outside, they found that one of the cows had given birth during the night. The calf was a beautiful russet color, strong and healthy despite the terrible weather. "It is a good sign," Grace said, watching the calf nurse from its mother. "New life, right in the middle of winter. It means spring is coming and better times with it." She was right. When spring did arrive, it came with a rush of green grass and wildflowers that transformed the prairie into something beautiful. Grace planted a much larger garden than she had been able to maintain in town, and Gregory helped her turn the soil and build raised beds for her vegetables. The 3 cows all had healthy calves, giving them 6 head of cattle now, including Ferdinand. It was still a small herd by any standard, but it was growth, progress, a future beginning to take shape. Gregory found more work in town, and this time people seemed more willing to hire him. Maybe it was because he was a married man now, which gave him a certain respectability in their eyes. Or maybe word had spread about how hard he worked and how honest he was in his dealings. Either way, the extra income helped tremendously. Grace continued working part-time at the general store, though Mrs. Henderson understood when she needed to stay at the ranch during busy seasons. The older woman had become something of a friend to both of them, often sending them home with little extras from the store or sharing news about good deals on supplies. By early summer, Gregory had saved enough money to make his first payment on the loan from Grace. He brought the money to her one evening, setting $30 on the kitchen table. Grace looked at the money, then at him. "We are married now," she said. "What is mine is yours, and what is yours is mine. You do not need to pay me back." "I know," Gregory said, "but I want to. Not because I feel obligated, but because I want you to know that I keep my promises. You took a chance on me when nobody else would, and I want to honor that." Grace's eyes grew soft. "All right, but I am putting this money right back into the ranch. Toward those chickens we have been talking about getting." They bought a dozen laying hens and a rooster, building a coop from scrap lumber Gregory salvaged from a barn that was being torn down in town. The chickens proved to be a good investment, providing eggs for their table and eventually chicks that they could sell or raise for meat. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Work was still hard and money was still tight, but they were making it. More importantly, they were making it together as a team, each of them contributing their strengths to build something that neither could have built alone. One evening in late July, as they sat on the porch after dinner, Grace took Gregory's hand and placed it on her stomach. "There is something I need to tell you," she said, her voice soft but steady. Gregory looked at her, seeing the mixture of joy and nervousness in her eyes, and understanding dawned. "Grace, are you?" "Yes," she said. "The baby should come in February if my calculations are correct." Gregory felt like all the air had been knocked out of his lungs. A baby. They were going to have a baby. He was going to be a father. "Are you happy?" Grace asked, searching his face. "I know we have not talked much about children yet, and the ranch is still struggling." And Gregory silenced her with a kiss, gentle and full of all the love he could not quite put into words. When he pulled back, he was smiling wider than he had smiled in years. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," he said. "Grace, this is the best news you could have given me." They sat together as the sun set, making plans for the future. They would need to add a room to the house, a nursery for the baby. Gregory would have to work even harder to make sure they had enough money put by for when Grace could not work as much. They would need to buy supplies, prepare for all the ways a baby would change their lives. But underneath all the practical concerns was a deep well of joy. They were creating a family, building something that would outlast them both. The Brennan Ranch would have a future now, a reason to keep fighting and growing. The next months flew by in a blur of preparation. Gregory added a small room onto the house, working late into the night by lamplight to get it finished before the baby came. Grace sewed baby clothes from scraps of fabric, her needle flying as she created tiny gowns and blankets. Mrs. Henderson contributed a beautiful cradle that had been in her family for generations, saying she had no grandchildren of her own to give it to. "You and Gregory are like family to me," she said when Grace tried to protest. "Let an old woman spoil this baby a little." Grace's pregnancy progressed normally, though she tired more easily as the months went on. Gregory took on more of the heavy work, insisting that she rest when she needed to. But Grace was not one to sit idle for long. Even in her 8th month, he would find her in the garden or tending to the chickens, her hands never still. "I need to stay busy," she explained when he gently scolded her. "If I sit around thinking about the birth, I will just worry." "Are you frightened?" Gregory asked, pulling her close. "A little," Grace admitted. "My mother died when I was born. The midwife said it was just bad luck, that these things happen sometimes, but I cannot help thinking about it." "You are not your mother," Gregory said firmly. You are strong and healthy, and the midwife will be here. Everything is going to be fine." He said it with more confidence than he felt. The truth was, he was terrified too. Women did die in childbirth, even strong, healthy women like Grace. The thought of losing her, of being left alone with a baby to raise and a heart that would never heal, kept him awake at night. But he did not share those fears with Grace. She needed his strength now, his certainty that everything would work out. So he held her and told her he loved her and prayed to a God he was not sure listened that he would keep Grace safe. The baby came on a cold February morning, 3 days before Grace's due date. The labor was long and difficult, lasting from before dawn until well into the afternoon. Gregory paced the main room while the midwife worked in the bedroom, jumping at every sound, his imagination conjuring every possible disaster. When he finally heard the baby's cry, thin and reedy but strong, he nearly collapsed with relief. The midwife emerged a few minutes later, smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Brennan, and your wife is tired but well. You can go in now." Gregory entered the bedroom on shaking legs. Grace was propped up against the pillows, looking exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had made. When she looked up at him, her eyes were shining with tears and joy. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Gregory approached the bed and looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blankets. The baby had a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed to look right through him, ancient and wise despite being only minutes old. One tiny fist had escaped the blanket and waved in the air, fingers splayed. "He is perfect," Gregory whispered, afraid to speak too loudly as if he might break the spell of this moment. "Would you like to hold him?" Grace asked. With the midwife's help, Gregory took his son into his arms, supporting the tiny head carefully. The baby was so light, so fragile, and yet Gregory could already see strength in the set of his little jaw, the way his fingers curled around Gregory's thumb when he offered it. "What should we name him?" Grace asked. They had discussed names, of course, but nothing had felt quite right. Now, looking down at his son, Gregory knew. "Gabriel," he said. "Gabriel Brennan, after your father." Grace's eyes filled with fresh tears. "My father would have been so proud," she said. "Thank you." Little Gabriel proved to be a relatively easy baby, which was fortunate given that ranch work did not stop for infant care. Grace recovered quickly from the birth, and soon she was back to her usual activities, though now with a baby strapped to her back in a clever sling she had devised. Gabriel seemed content to watch the world from his perch, his dark eyes taking in everything around him with solemn interest. The spring that Gabriel turned 3 months old was the best the ranch had ever seen. All 6 cows had healthy calves, giving them a herd of 12. Gregory sold 3 of the yearlings for good money, and used the profits to buy materials for a proper chicken coop and to make some much-needed repairs to the house. But more importantly, he went into town and bought Grace a proper wedding ring from the jeweler. A simple gold band that matched his mother's, but was sized perfectly for Grace's finger. "I know we have been married for over a year now," he said, slipping it onto her finger as Gabriel gurgled happily from his cradle. "But I wanted you to have something that was just yours, not a hand-me-down." "I love the ring your mother wore," Grace protested, but her eyes were shining as she looked at the new band. "I know, but you deserve your own treasures too, your own memories. This ring marks the life we are building together, the family we are creating." Grace kissed him, long and sweet, and Gregory thought about how far they had come from that day in the muddy street. He had been so low then, so certain that his life would never amount to anything. And now here he was, with a wife he loved, a son who was healthy and growing, and a ranch that was finally beginning to prosper. That summer, Tom Richardson got married to a girl from Wichita whose father owned a large banking concern. The wedding was the social event of the season in Newton, with people coming from all over Kansas to attend. Gregory and Grace were not invited, which suited them just fine. "I heard his wife has never worked a day in her life," Mrs. Henderson reported at the general store, always the source of the best gossip. "Brought 3 trunks full of dresses with her. I cannot imagine what she will do with all those fancy clothes out here." Grace just smiled. She had 4 dresses to her name, all practical and serviceable. And she was perfectly content with that. By the time Gabriel was a year old, the Brennan ranch had grown to 20 head of cattle and 3 dozen chickens. Gregory had also bought a pair of pigs, and Grace had taken over the smoking and curing of the meat, producing hams and bacon that Mrs. Henderson sold in the general store for good prices. They were not rich, would probably never be rich by Newton standards. But they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. Gabriel was walking now, toddling around the house and yard on unsteady legs, getting into everything with the determined curiosity of a child discovering the world. One evening in late autumn, as they sat on the porch watching Gabriel chase fireflies in the gathering dusk, Grace leaned her head on Gregory's shoulder. "You remember what you said to me at the Harvest Festival?" she asked. "Before you proposed." "I said a lot of things," Gregory replied with a smile. "You will have to be more specific." "You said I was the right path, the only path you wanted." Grace looked up at him. "I want you to know that you are the same for me, the right path, the only path. No matter what happens, no matter how hard things get, I will never regret choosing you." Gregory pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "We chose each other," he corrected, "and I thank God every day that we did." Gabriel came running up the porch steps then, his face flushed with excitement, a firefly cupped carefully in his small hands. "Look, Papa! Look, Mama!" "Very good, son," Gregory said. "Now let it go so it can find its family." Gabriel opened his hands and the firefly flew away, its light pulsing in the darkness. The boy watched it go with wide eyes, then turned and climbed into Grace's lap, suddenly tired from his adventure. As Grace rocked their son, humming a lullaby her mother had sung to her, Gregory felt a peace settle over him that he had never known was possible. This was what he had been fighting for all along, even when he did not know it. Not just a successful ranch or financial security, but a family, a home, a love that sustained him through every hardship. The years passed quickly after that, marked by the steady growth of both the ranch and their family. When Gabriel was 3, Grace gave birth to twin daughters, Emma and Alina, who were as different as night and day despite being born minutes apart. Emma had Grace's blonde hair and calm temperament, while Alina had Gregory's dark coloring and a spirited nature that reminded him forcefully of his horse Delilah. With 3 small children and a growing ranch, life was busier than ever. Gregory hired his first ranch hand, a young man named David who had just arrived in Kansas from Virginia and was willing to work hard for fair wages. The extra help made a tremendous difference, allowing Gregory to take on even more work and expand their operations. They bought more land, adding another 100 acres to the original homestead. They built a larger barn and a proper bunkhouse for ranch hands. The chicken flock grew to over 100 birds, and Grace hired a girl from town to help her with the processing and preserving of their produce and meat. Newton itself was changing too. The railroad had come through, bringing new people and new businesses. The town that had once mocked Gregory Brennan now pointed to him as an example of what hard work and determination could achieve. He served on the town council, and Grace helped organize the new school that Newton built to accommodate its growing population. Tom Richardson's marriage, by contrast, had not gone well. His wife had left him after 2 years, unable to adapt to life on the Kansas prairie and unwilling to even try. Tom had grown bitter and spent most of his time in the saloon, drinking away the fortune his father had built. Gregory felt no satisfaction in Tom's downfall, only a kind of sad pity for a man who had been given every advantage and squandered it. When Gabriel was 7, he started school in Newton. He was a bright boy, quick with numbers and possessing his mother's love of reading. Gregory made sure to praise his son's academic achievements as much as his progress in learning ranch work, determined that Gabriel would grow up with more options than he himself had. The twins started school 2 years later, and the schoolteacher reported that Emma was a natural artist, always drawing pictures in the margins of her papers, while Alina was fascinated by science and asked endless questions about how things worked. "You have raised remarkable children, Mrs. Henderson said one day. She was older now, her hair completely white, but her mind and spirit were as sharp as ever. "They are respectful, hardworking, and kind. You and Grace should be very proud." "We are," Gregory said, "though Grace deserves most of the credit. She is the one who teaches them their values, who makes sure they understand that people are more important than things." "You taught them that too," Mrs. Henderson countered. "By example, every day. Children learn more from what we do than what we say." On their 10th wedding anniversary, Gregory took Grace into Wichita for the weekend, leaving the children in Mrs. Henderson's capable care. It was the first time they had been away from the ranch and their children for more than a few hours, and Gregory had planned every detail carefully. They stayed in a real hotel with a dining room and everything. Gregory bought Grace a beautiful shawl from a shop that sold goods from back east. They went to see a theatrical performance, though neither of them could later remember much about the play itself. Too caught up in the simple joy of being together without the constant demands of children and ranch work. On their last evening, they walked along the river that ran through Wichita, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "If you could go back," Gregory said suddenly, "to that day in Newton when Delilah threw me, knowing everything that would come after, would you still make the same choice? Would you still loan me that money?" Grace looked at him like he had lost his mind. "Gregory Brennan, that is the silliest question you have ever asked me. Of course I would. That was not just a loan, it was an investment in our future, the best investment I ever made, even though it meant a harder life than you might have had otherwise. You could have married Tom or someone like him, had an easier time of things." "Easier does not mean better," Grace said firmly. "And Tom is a perfect example of why. He had everything handed to him and became nothing. You had to fight for everything and became someone worth knowing. Someone worth loving." She took his hands in hers, looking up at him with the same serious expression she had worn that first day outside the stockyard. "That means everything, Gregory. Not the ranch, not the money, not any of the material things we have managed to build. What means everything is that you are a good man, a good husband, a good father, that you treat me as an equal partner, not as property, that you value our children for who they are, not just for the work they can do. That is what I chose, and I have never regretted it for a single moment." Gregory pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling the solid reality of her in his arms. 10 years, and he loved her even more now than he had on their wedding day. Time and shared experience had only deepened what they had, turning the bright flash of new love into something more enduring, more real. "I love you," he said simply. "More than I knew it was possible to love anyone." "I love you too," Grace replied. "Always and forever." The years continued to roll by, each one bringing its own challenges and triumphs. When Gabriel was 14, Gregory began teaching him the full business side of ranching, including the buying and selling of cattle, negotiating with buyers, and managing accounts. The boy took to it naturally, showing a head for business that reminded Gregory of Grace. The twins, now 11, were growing into young women with distinct personalities and dreams. Emma had covered every wall of her room with drawings and paintings and talked about going to art school someday. Eleanor was fascinated by medicine and had already announced her intention to become a doctor, despite the fact that very few women pursued such careers. "If you want to be a doctor, you will be a doctor," Grace told her. "Do not let anyone tell you that you cannot do something just because you are a woman." The ranch now employed 5 full-time hands and owned over 200 head of cattle. Gregory had paid back every penny he had borrowed from Grace years ago, with interest, though she had tried to refuse it. That money, along with the profits from her side businesses, had gone into a special fund for their children's education. "They are going to have choices," Grace said firmly. "They can choose to stay and work the ranch if they want, but they need to know there are other options too." Gregory agreed wholeheartedly. He never wanted his children to feel trapped by circumstance the way he had felt after his father died. On a warm day in May, just after Gabriel's 15th birthday, Gregory was working in the south pasture when David came riding up fast, his face pale with concern. "Boss, you need to come quick. It is Miss Grace. She collapsed in the garden." Gregory's heart dropped into his stomach. He rode back to the house faster than he had ever ridden, fear clawing at his throat. When he got there, he found Grace lying on the couch, very pale but conscious. The doctor had already been sent for. "I am fine," Grace insisted, though her voice was weak. "I just stood up too fast and got dizzy." But she was not fine. The doctor, when he arrived and examined her, took Gregory aside with a grave expression. "Her heart," he said quietly. "There is something wrong with it, some kind of weakness. I am not sure exactly what, but she needs to take it easy. No more heavy work, no stress." Gregory felt like the world was tilting under his feet. "Is she going to die?" "Not immediately," the doctor said. "But this is serious, Gregory. If she is not careful, if she keeps pushing herself the way she has been, then yes, her heart could give out. She needs rest, proper nutrition, and as little worry as possible." The next weeks were the hardest of Gregory's life. Grace chafed at the restrictions, hating being forced to sit still while others did the work she had always done. But Gregory was relentless in enforcing the doctor's orders, taking over all the heavy household work himself, and hiring another woman from town to help with the cooking and cleaning. Slowly, Grace's color returned and her strength began to rebuild. But she was different now, more fragile in a way that frightened Gregory. He found himself watching her constantly, looking for signs that her heart was failing again. "Stop hovering," Grace said one evening, exasperation clear in her voice. "I am not made of glass, Gregory. I am sick, not dying." The doctor said, "I know what the doctor said, but I also know my own body. And I know that I am going to live my life, not spend whatever time I have left sitting in a chair being waited on." She softened her tone. "I will be careful, I promise, but you need to let me be me." It was hard, possibly the hardest thing Gregory had ever done, but he tried to step back and give Grace the space she needed. The children helped, taking over more responsibilities around the house and ranch without being asked. Gabriel, in particular, stepped up, working alongside Gregory and the ranch hands from dawn to dusk. "I can handle more, Pa," he said. "I am not a kid anymore." Gregory looked at his son, really looked at him, and realized Gabriel was right. At 15, he was nearly as tall as Gregory, with broad shoulders and work-roughened hands. When had that happened? When had his little boy grown into a young man? I know you can, Gregory said. And I appreciate all your help, but do not forget to still be young too. You have got plenty of time to be an adult. By the end of summer, Grace had recovered enough to return to light work, though Gregory and the children watched her like hawks, ready to intervene if she pushed too hard. She had to give up some of her business ventures, which frustrated her, but she threw herself into other projects that required less physical labor. She started teaching reading and writing to the ranch hands who had never had the opportunity to learn, holding classes in the evening by lamplight. She compiled all her recipes into a book that Mrs. Henderson sold at the general store, which became quite popular among the women of Newton. And she spent more time with the children, particularly the twins, making sure they knew they were loved and valued. Life found a new equilibrium, different from before but still good. Grace's health remained stable, though she had occasional bad days when her heart would flutter and she needed to rest. On those days, Gregory would sit with her, reading aloud or just holding her hand, grateful for every moment they still had together. Gabriel graduated from the Newton School at the top of his class when he turned 16. He had been offered a scholarship to attend university, but he chose to stay and help run the ranch instead. "This is my legacy too," he told his parents. "Everything you built for us. I want to be part of making it even better, making it something I can pass on to my own children someday." Gregory was proud beyond words, but he made sure Gabriel understood that the door was not closed. "You can always change your mind," he said. "The ranch will be here and so will we." The twins, now 13, were beginning to think about their own futures. Emma still dreamed of art school, spending every spare moment sketching and painting. Eleanor had become the doctor's unofficial assistant, often accompanying him on his rounds around Newton and the surrounding farms, learning everything she could about medicine and healing. One evening, as the family sat together on the porch watching the sun set over their land, Gabriel cleared his throat nervously. "There is something I need to tell you all," he said. "I have been courting someone. Her name is Sarah Mitchell. Her father owns the Mitchell farm about 10 miles north of here." Gregory and Grace exchanged a look. They had suspected something was going on, had noticed Gabriel riding out more often than ranch business strictly required. "Tell us about her," Grace said gently. Gabriel's face lit up in a way that reminded Gregory powerfully of himself as a young man. "She is smart and kind, and she works harder than anyone I have ever met. She wants to be a rancher too, wants to build something with her own hands. We have a lot in common. Are you happy?" Gregory asked, which was really the only question that mattered. "Yes, Pa, very happy." "Then we would like to meet her," Grace said. "Bring her to Sunday dinner this week." Sarah Mitchell proved to be everything Gabriel had said and more. She was a sensible young woman with a quick smile and a no-nonsense attitude that reminded both Gregory and Grace of themselves at that age. She and Gabriel clearly adored each other, finishing each other's sentences and communicating with looks and small gestures that spoke of a deep connection. "She is lovely," Grace said after Sarah had gone home. "When do you think he will propose?" "Soon," Gregory predicted. "He has that same look I had when I was courting you, like he has found the other half of himself and cannot imagine living without her." He was right. Gabriel proposed to Sarah that Christmas, presenting her with a simple ring he had saved for months to buy. The wedding was planned for the following spring, to be held at the ranch with the whole community invited. As the preparations got underway, Gregory found himself thinking a lot about time and legacy. He was 45 years old now, Grace 43. They had built a good life together, raised 3 remarkable children, and created something lasting from nothing but determination and love. But Grace's health scare had reminded him that their time was not infinite. Every day was a gift, every moment precious. One night, lying in bed with Grace curled against his side, he voiced some of these thoughts aloud. "You think we have done enough?" he asked. "For the kids, for the ranch, for everything." Grace was quiet for a long moment. "I think we have done all we could with what we were given," she said finally. "We started with nothing and built something meaningful. We raised children who are good people, who know how to work and how to love. We have loved each other well. What more could anyone ask? I just want to make sure they are taken care of," Gregory said. "If something happens to us." "They will be fine," Grace said with absolute certainty. "We taught them how to stand on their own feet, how to support each other, how to keep going when things get hard. They have everything they need." She turned in his arms to look at him directly. "Besides, we are not done yet. We have still got years ahead of us, Gregory. Years to see grandchildren born, to watch our kids build their own lives, to keep growing this ranch and this family." "You promise?" Gregory asked, only half joking. "I promise to fight for every day we have got," Grace said. "That is the best promise I can make." Gabriel and Sarah were married on a beautiful April morning, with the prairie in full bloom and the sky so blue, it almost hurt to look at. The ceremony was held in the yard of the Brennan Ranch, with chairs arranged in neat rows and an arch of wildflowers marking where the couple would stand. Grace had been in charge of most of the planning, and she had outdone herself. There were tables groaning with food, lanterns strung from every available surface for the dancing that would follow, and flowers everywhere. As Gregory walked Gabriel up to the makeshift altar, he thought about his own wedding, so small and simple compared to this. But the love had been just as real, the promises just as binding. He squeezed his son's shoulder. "Your mother and I are so proud of you," he said quietly. "Be good to Sarah. Love her with everything you have. That is the secret to a happy marriage." "I will, Pa," Gabriel promised. "You and Ma taught me well." The ceremony was beautiful, and when Gabriel and Sarah said their vows, there was not a dry eye among the guests. Even Gregory, who prided himself on being practical and not overly emotional, had to wipe his eyes more than once. The reception lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and celebration. Gregory danced with Grace, with his daughters, with Mrs. Henderson, and even with Sarah's mother. But his favorite dance was the last one, when he and Grace swayed together under the stars, long after most of the guests had gone home. "We did it," Grace said softly. "We raised a son who found real love, who chose a good woman and is starting his own family." "We did," Gregory agreed. "And we are not done yet. 2 more to go," Grace laughed. "The twins are only 15. Let us not rush them into marriage just yet." "Fair enough." Gregory pulled her closer. "Thank you, Grace." "For what?" "For everything. For taking a chance on a muddy cowboy all those years ago. For building this life with me. For being the best partner I could have ever asked for." Grace smiled up at him. "You were the only woman who did not laugh at me," she quoted back to him. "That means everything." "It does," Gregory said. "It really does." Gabriel and Sarah built a house on the northern section of the Brennan property, a wedding gift from Gregory and Grace. The young couple worked the land together, and it quickly became apparent that Sarah was as skilled a rancher as Gabriel. Within 2 years, they had expanded their own herd and were making plans to buy more land. They also made Gregory and Grace grandparents, first with a son they named Gregory Jr., then a year later with a daughter named Alice. Gregory was surprised by how much joy those grandchildren brought him. He had loved being a father, but being a grandfather was different, somehow easier and more fun. Emma, meanwhile, had won a scholarship to an art school in Chicago. It was a bittersweet moment when she left, the whole family accompanying her to the train station in Newton. Gregory hugged his daughter tight, fighting back tears. "Make us proud," he said. "Not that you need to, we are already proud." "I will write every week," Emma promised. "And I will come home for holidays. This is not goodbye, just see you later." But it felt like goodbye in a way, like his little girl was leaving and a grown woman was taking her place. Grace must have sensed his thoughts because she squeezed his hand as they watched the train pull away. "She will be fine," Grace said. "She has our strength and her own unique gifts. She is going to do wonderful things." Alina stayed close to home, working with the doctor and eventually becoming his official apprentice. It was unusual for a woman to pursue medicine, but Alina had the doctor's full support and a determination that would not be denied. "People need healing," she said simply when asked why she wanted to be a doctor. "And I can provide that. Why should gender matter?" Why indeed, Gregory thought. His daughter was going to change the world in her own way, just as Emma was changing it in hers. As Gregory approached his 50th birthday, he began to think more seriously about succession. Gabriel was essentially running the ranch day to day now, with Gregory serving more as an advisor than active labor. His body was not what it used to be, his back often aching after a long day, his hands stiff in the morning from arthritis. But he was not ready to fully retire either. The ranch was still his life, still his purpose. And Grace, despite her heart condition, was still actively involved in the community, still teaching and mentoring and making Newton a better place. They celebrated Gregory's 50th birthday with a large party that the whole town attended. It was a far cry from the young man who had been laughed at in the street all those years ago. Now people came to Gregory for advice, respected his opinion, valued his contributions to the community. Tom Richardson showed up at the party, surprisingly. He was 52 now, weathered and worn from too much drink and too many poor choices. He approached Gregory hesitantly, like a man expecting to be turned away. "Brennan," he said, "I wanted to congratulate you and to apologize. I was cruel to you when we were young. I mocked you when you were down. I tried to steal your wife. You had every reason to hold a grudge, but you never did. You are a better man than I ever was." Gregory looked at Tom for a long moment, seeing not the arrogant young man from decades ago, but a broken middle-aged man who had squandered his advantages, and now had to live with the consequences. "We were all young and foolish once," Gregory said, extending his hand. "What matters is who we became. It is never too late to be a better person, Tom." Tom shook his hand, tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he said simply, then melted back into the crowd. Grace had witnessed the exchange. "That was kind of you," she said. "You taught me to be kind," Gregory replied. "You saw past my failures to my potential. How could I do any less for someone else?" When Gregory was 52, disaster struck. A prairie fire, started by lightning during a dry summer storm, swept across thousands of acres of grassland. The Brennan Ranch was directly in its path. Gregory, Gabriel, and all the ranch hands worked frantically to save what they could, digging fire breaks and driving the cattle to safety. Grace and Sarah organized water brigades, while the twins helped evacuate the smaller animals and important documents. For 2 terrifying days, the outcome hung in balance. Smoke filled the air so thick it was hard to breathe. The heat was intense enough to blister skin. Gregory worked until he was ready to collapse, then worked some more, refusing to give up the ranch he had spent a lifetime building. In the end, they saved most of it. The house and barn survived, protected by the fire breaks and a shift in wind direction that seemed almost providential. They lost some pasture land and several outbuildings, and 3 of the cattle did not make it out. But compared to what could have been lost, they were lucky in the aftermath. As they surveyed the damage and began the long process of rebuilding, Gregory stood with Grace looking out over their scorched land. "We will come back from this," Grace said firmly, reading his thoughts. "We have come back from worse." "Have we?" Gregory asked wearily. He was exhausted, his clothes still smelling of smoke, his hands blistered from the shovel. "We started with nothing," Grace reminded him. $47 and a dream. "This is just another challenge, another obstacle to overcome, and we will overcome it, just like we have overcome everything else." She was right, of course. The community rallied around them, neighbors coming to help with the cleanup and rebuilding. Materials were donated, labor was given freely, and within 6 months the ranch was back to something approaching normal. But the fire had reminded Gregory of something important. Nothing lasted forever. Not buildings, not success, not even life itself. What mattered was how you spent the time you had, who you spent it with, what you built that would outlast you. That winter, Gregory and Grace sat down with all 3 of their children and their spouses and made their plans for the future official. Gabriel would inherit the ranch, with the understanding that his sisters would always have a place there if they needed it. Emma's art was beginning to sell for good money, and she had established herself in Chicago with a small studio. Eleanor had just been accepted to medical school, one of only 3 women in her class. "I am so proud of all of you," Grace said, her voice thick with emotion. "You have become exactly who you were meant to be." "We learned from the best," Emma said, squeezing her mother's hand. That night, after everyone had gone to their own homes, Gregory and Grace lay in bed listening to the winter wind howl outside. "We did good, did we not?" Gregory said. "We did very good," Grace agreed. 3 amazing children, a successful ranch, a marriage that has weathered every storm. "Not bad for a muddy cowboy and the woman who did not laugh at him," Gregory chuckled. "That feels like a lifetime ago." "It was a lifetime ago, our lifetime, built day by day, choice by choice." Grace turned to look at him in the darkness. "If I could go back and do it all again, I would not change a single thing." "Not even the hard parts?" Gregory asked. "Especially not the hard parts. Those are what made us who we are, what made this all mean something." She paused. "Do you have any regrets, Gregory?" He thought about it seriously before answering. "Just one. I wish I had thanked you properly that first day when you loaned me the money for Ferdinand. I wish I had found the words to tell you what it meant to me, that you saw something in me worth investing in." "You thank me every day since," Grace said softly. "In every choice you made, every promise you kept, every moment you chose to be the man I knew you could be. That was all the thanks I needed." The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and sorrows. Gregory's mother-in-law had been wrong about one thing. Grace's heart, though weakened, kept beating strong. She lived to see all 3 of her children established in their own lives, to hold 5 grandchildren, to celebrate her and Gregory's 30th wedding anniversary. The anniversary party was held at the ranch on a beautiful September evening. The house had been expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family, and the yard was large enough now to hold the 100+ guests who came to celebrate. Gabriel, now 30 years old with 3 children of his own, stood up to give a toast. "To my parents," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd, "who taught us that real wealth is not measured in dollars, but in the love we give and receive. Who showed us that it does not matter where you start, only where you are willing to go. Who proved that a good marriage is built on partnership, respect, and choosing each other new every day." There was not a dry eye in the house as everyone raised their glasses. Gregory looked at Grace, seeing the young woman she had been and the wise woman she had become all at once. Her hair was gray now, her face lined with the passage of time, but to him she was as beautiful as the day he met her. "I love you," he mouthed across the crowd. "I love you too," she mouthed back. When Gregory was 60 years old, Grace's heart finally began to fail in earnest. The doctor was called more frequently, and medications that had once helped seemed to have less and less effect. Gregory knew what was coming, had known for years, but that did not make it any easier. On a cold January morning, Grace woke with a strange look of peace on her face. "Today," she said simply, and Gregory knew what she meant. He gathered the children. Emma came from Chicago, having been alerted by telegram. Eleanor took leave from her medical practice. Gabriel was already there, of course, with Sarah and the grandchildren. They all gathered in the bedroom where Grace lay propped up on pillows, looking tired but content. She spoke to each of them individually, sharing final words of wisdom and love. To Emma, she gave her blessing to keep creating beauty in the world. To Eleanor, she passed on her mother's medical bag, a symbol of the healing tradition being passed down. To Gabriel, she confirmed what he already knew, that the ranch was in good hands, and she was proud of everything he had become. Then she asked for time alone with Gregory. The children filed out quietly, leaving husband and wife together one last time. "No tears," Grace said, though her own eyes were wet. "We had a good run, you and I." "The best," Gregory managed to say past the lump in his throat. "Promise me something," Grace said, gripping his hand with surprising strength. "Promise me you will keep living, really living, not just existing. Spend time with your grandchildren. Finish that book of ranch stories you started. Maybe even find love again someday if the right person comes along. Grace, promise me," she insisted. "I do not want you to spend your remaining years just mourning me. Honor our love by continuing to live fully." "I promise," Gregory said, though he could not imagine ever loving anyone but her. "Good," Grace smiled. "Do you remember what you said to me once? That I was the only woman who did not laugh at you?" "I remember everything," Gregory said. "That moment changed both our lives," Grace said. "Because I saw you, really saw you, for who you were and who you could become. And you did the same for me. We saw each other's potential and helped each other become our best selves. That is what real love is, Gregory. Not romance or passion, though we had plenty of both. Real love is seeing someone fully and choosing to stand beside them anyway." "I would choose you again," Gregory said fiercely. 1,000 times over I would choose you. And I you." Grace's voice was getting weaker now. "We had something rare, you and I, something most people never find. I am grateful for every moment." She closed her eyes then, her breathing becoming shallow. Gregory held her hand, whispering words of love until finally, peacefully, she was gone. The funeral was 3 days later, attended by what seemed like the entire population of Newton and the surrounding area. Grace had touched so many lives through her teaching, her kindness, her quiet strength. The stories people told painted a picture of a woman who had made her corner of the world better simply by being in it. Gregory stood at the graveside, his children on either side of him, and watched as they lowered Grace into the ground next to where his parents were buried. The preacher spoke about eternal life and reunion in heaven, but Gregory barely heard it. All he could think was that the woman who had been his partner for over 30 years, who had seen him at his worst and chosen to stay, was gone. The months after Grace's death were the hardest of Gregory's life. He went through the motions of living, eating, sleeping, working, but inside he felt hollow. The ranch ran smoothly under Gabriel's management, which was good because Gregory found it hard to care about cattle prices or fence repairs. Emma stayed for several weeks after the funeral, and her presence helped more than Gregory could express. She had inherited her mother's gift for understanding without words, for knowing when to talk and when to simply sit in companionable silence. "She would not want you to be like this," Emma said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. She made you promise to keep living. I know, Gregory said, but knowing and doing are two different things. Then start small, Emma suggested. One thing each day that is just for you, not for the ranch or for responsibility. Read a book. Take a walk. Work on that story collection Ma mentioned. Gregory latched onto that last suggestion. Grace had encouraged him for years to write down the stories of his life, the history of the ranch and the family they had built. He had started several times but never finished, always too busy with more urgent matters. Now, with time heavy on his hands and grief weighing on his heart, he began to write in earnest. Every evening he would sit at the desk and put words on paper, telling the story of a young man who got thrown from his horse and the woman who did not laugh. He wrote about building a life from nothing, about love that sustained through hardship, about the family they had created together. It was therapeutic in a way he had not expected. As he wrote, he found himself remembering not just the sad ending but all the joy that had come before. The laughter, the triumphs, the quiet moments that had made up the fabric of their life together. 6 months after Grace's death, Emma returned to Chicago, satisfied that her father was going to be all right. Eleanor visited regularly from her practice in Wichita. And Gabriel was there every day, sometimes just sitting with his father in the evening, sometimes working side by side like they had when Gabriel was young. "You are going to be okay, Pa," Gabriel said one night. "It does not feel like it now, but you will be." "Your mother was my whole world," Gregory said. "I do not know how to be in this world without her." "You still have us," Gabriel reminded him, "and your grandchildren, and a whole community that respects and cares about you. Ma is not here, but her legacy is all around you. In us, in this ranch, in everyone whose life she touched." Slowly, painfully, Gregory began to heal. It was not a linear process. Some days were better than others, and there were still moments when the grief would hit him like a physical blow. But he kept his promise to Grace. He lived, really lived, not just existed. He finished the book of stories and had it published locally. It sold surprisingly well, with people from all over Kansas buying copies. Some of them wrote to him, sharing their own stories of struggle and perseverance, of love found in unexpected places. He spent time with his grandchildren, teaching them to ride and rope, sharing stories about their grandmother. Little Gregory Jr., now 12, showed a particular aptitude for ranch work and often asked if he could help with various tasks. "You remind me of your father at that age," Gregory told the boy. "Always eager, always trying to prove himself." "Grandma said you were like that too," young Gregory replied, "that you never gave up no matter how hard things got." "Your grandmother was a wise woman," Gregory said. "I hope you remember her lessons." "I will," the boy promised. "Pa tells us stories about her all the time, how she was smart and strong and did not care what other people thought, how she saw the best in people even when they could not see it themselves." That was Grace, Gregory thought. That was exactly who she had been. As Gregory entered his mid-60s, he found a new equilibrium. The acute grief had softened into something gentler, a bittersweet mixture of gratitude for what he had had and sadness for what he had lost. He kept Grace's memory alive, but did not let it trap him in the past. He had dinner with his children and grandchildren every Sunday, rotating between their houses. He served on the town council and helped organize the annual Harvest Festival. He continued writing, producing a second book of stories that was even more successful than the first, and he made peace with his life. Not the kind of peace that comes from having no regrets or pain, but the kind that comes from accepting that joy and sorrow are intertwined, that you cannot have one without risking the other, and that the risk is always worth it. On what would have been his and Grace's 35th wedding anniversary, Gregory rode out to a spot on the ranch that had been special to them. It was a small rise overlooking the prairie, where you could see for miles in every direction. They had come here often, especially in the early years, to watch the sunset and talk about their dreams. Gregory sat on the ground, his old bones protesting the movement, and looked out over the land they had built together. The ranch was thriving under Gabriel's management. The family was growing and prospering. Emma's art hung in galleries across the country. Alina was chief of medicine at her hospital. Gabriel's children were being raised with the same values of hard work and integrity that had defined their grandparents. "We did it, Grace," Gregory said aloud to the wind. "Everything we dreamed about, we made it real, and it is going to outlast us both, keep growing and changing long after we are gone." He could almost hear her response in his head. "Of course we did. Did you ever doubt it?" No, he thought. Not really. Because he had learned the most important lesson of his life that day in the muddy street when a young woman did not laugh at his humiliation. He had learned that there are people in this world who see not what you are but what you could become. And if you are very lucky, one of those people will love you and help you become that better version of yourself. Grace had been that person for him. And in return, he had tried to be that person for her and for their children and for everyone whose life he touched. That, he thought, was the real definition of a life well lived. Not wealth or fame or recognition, but the positive impact you had on the people around you. The love you gave and received. The legacy you left behind in the hearts and minds of those who came after you. Gregory lived to see his 70th birthday, still sharp of mind though his body was beginning to fail. He spent his final years surrounded by family, content in the knowledge that everything he and Grace had built would continue. On a warm spring evening, with apple blossoms drifting past the window and his children gathered around his bed, Gregory Brennan closed his eyes for the last time. His last thought was of Grace, young and beautiful, standing in the doorway of the general store with that serious expression on her face. The woman who had not laughed, who had seen him instead of his failures, who had changed the course of his entire life with a simple act of kindness. "I am coming, Grace," he whispered. "Wait for me." And somewhere, beyond the veil of this world, he was certain she was smiling and saying what she always said when he asked if she was ready. "I have been ready. You are the one who is slow." The Brennan Ranch continued for generations after that, passed down from parent to child, each generation adding their own chapter to the story that had begun with a muddy cowboy and a woman who did not laugh. Gabriel ran it successfully, until his own son took over. Emma's paintings hung in the ranch house, a constant reminder of the beauty she had brought into the world. Alina's descendants included 3 more doctors, carrying on the healing tradition. And in Newton, Kansas, people still told the story of Gregory and Grace Brennan, the couple who had started with nothing and built something lasting. The story of how a moment of kindness had changed 2 lives and created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. Because that is what real love does. It does not just change the people directly involved. It ripples outward, touching everyone it meets, creating circles of impact that spread further than anyone can imagine. That means everything.